Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. This is Dr. Latoya Wells, Doctor of Nursing Practice, family nurse practitioner, and owner of Wells Legacy Health and Wellness. Tonight, we are going to discuss a topic that I picked about 3 or 4 weeks ago as I was scheduling the different live topics. Um, I didn't realize that this is something that hit close to home. As you all know, the month of July, we are discussing or have been discussing all things mental health in the minority population. In the month of July, there are several different health topics that are highlighted, that are talked about, that are discussed. And this month, we have been discussing mental health as it relates to the minority population. Tonight, we're going to be discussing grief. And as I speak with friends and I speak with associates and colleagues, and I am observing and scrolling through social media, I am witnessing and seeing that many of us are dealing with loss of a loved one, loss of a friend, loss of a coworker, or have dealt with the loss of someone. And we're in a different stage of grief than those who have just recently experienced that loss. And so when I was in nursing school, I can remember discussing grief and mental health. And when I did my mental health rotation, it wasn't my favorite, but I came to love mental health because there was a season in my career where I focused on um, medical psych. So we took care of the medical component of the individuals that were in the mental health facilities. And so I got a bird's eye view and got more experience into the mental health realm than I thought I would. And so I have I won't say a love hate relationship with it, but I have a new perspective about mental health, and it's all about perspective. I've shared with you guys, and I've been pretty transparent about my journey with grief after the loss of my grandmother. And tomorrow, August 1st, will be 3 years. And so someone asked me, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they mentioned, "Well, tomorrow is going to be the anniversary of your grandma's passing." And I didn't really put two and two together. Like, it wasn't like it was the first year or the second year. So here I'm in the third year, and I feel like I'm in a different phase of grieving. And it wasn't until I actually sat with it that I began to get a little sad about it, because I do miss her. Um, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. But grief, there's so many different phases of grief. What I thought originally was 5 phases of grief. In nursing school, we learned the 5 phases of grief and or stages of grief. And then in doing some research for this, I learned that there's actually more stages. There's 7 stages. So you can look at it from 5 stages, or you can look at those extra 2 stages and make it 5 stages that individuals go through when it comes to grief. Grief is something that we will all experience at some point in our life. We often describe it as you're going through the different phases and stages of it. For me, it felt like I was on this journey, and I described my grief as the waves. Like, you feel the little ripples, the ones that kind of barely touch your feet. It's barely noticeable. In the beginning, it was like those big tidal waves that just kind of hit you and knocked you off your feet, and you're underneath grasping for air and trying to fight your way out of this tumultuous spiral. That's how it felt in the beginning for me. And then it got to a point where I was in a rip current. For those of you who are in Florida and know about rip currents. And in the beginning, I was fighting, trying to stay alive. And then I began to just relax and remember that I need to swim parallel, right? And then it was those waves that kind of hit you at your waist and you jump over them. And then the waves begin to get less and less violent, shall I say. Um, and yeah, so I'm in a different, I can't explain to you today where I am as it pertains to grief. I just know that when I sat with it for a moment and I thought, oh wow, tomorrow is going to be 1 year since my grandma Clay passed, I got a little teary eyed. But we're going to focus on the different stages of grief, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how it impacts our overall health. When we, as a healthcare provider, when we're taking care of our patients, I'm not just taking care of your heart. I'm not just taking care of your kidneys. I'm not just taking care of the, the cut that you just had on your hand or your finger, or the infection that you may have, or that rash that you may be dealing with. We're dealing with the whole person, because when your heart is not doing well, it impacts every area of your life, especially if it's impacting your ability to be independent, your ability to work, your ability to take care of yourself. It begins to impact your mental health. And so mental health is just as important as if you were to hurt your arm or your shoulder, or you needed to, take a break from eating certain food because that was bothering your stomach and now you have gastroenteritis. Mental health is just that important. The stages of grief, as I originally knew it, was denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. But there's actually seven stages of grief. And we're going to kind of work through those a little bit. So the 5 stages of grief, when we talk about denial, grief is, as we know it, grief is an overwhelming emotion, right? And it's not one that we know how we're going to react when it hits us, right? And not everyone is going to respond differently. Like, grief isn't going to be the same for me as it was for someone else, even though we may be experiencing the same loss. Let's just say me and my cousins, or me and my siblings, we all lost our grandmother, but the way in which we grieve look different. And so denial is denying it, meaning that they're not gone, right? They're denying that the loss happened, or not wanting to believe that it happened. Or pretending that that this situation didn't occur. It occurred, and our minds have to find a way to figure that out. As you move through the different phases of grief, you'll experience different things. So grief is an overwhelming emotion, as we know. It's not unusual to respond to a strong or often sudden feeling by pretending the loss or change isn't happening, as I mentioned. Denying it gives you the time or more to gradually absorb the news and begin to process it, right? Sometimes it takes us time to actually believe that it happened. And many times it's like how I explained it was, I feel like I'm in a bad dream. And when I wake up tomorrow, everything's going to be the way it was before. It's a defense mechanism that we utilize to help us, one, to numb the situation so it's not as intense. And our body just kind of does that to protect ourselves. As we move out of the denial phase, the emotions that we've been hiding will begin to arise. And so I can remember there was a situation that happened immediately after my grandmother passed with a family member. And I'm not gonna, say what happened, but I just kind of looked at him and I was like, huh? What? What did you just say? And in my mind, I was processing it differently than my family member. And so we were able to laugh about it later. But in the moment, that person was asking a valid question and they wanted an answer. And they wanted the answer that, she wasn't gone, but that she was just sleeping or something. The next phase is anger, where denial may be considered a coping mechanism. Anger is a masking effect. Anger is hiding many of the emotions and pain that we carry. And so I can look back and I can see the anger in some of my family members immediately after the death of grandma. And the anger may be redirected at other people, such as the person who died, a family member, what have you. And we may even aim our anger at a inanimate object, like punching a wall or things like that. And while our rational brain knows that this person isn't to blame or this object isn't to blame, our feelings in that moment are too intense, to act according, right? We know we shouldn't be punching the wall, but in that moment, we have to have some type of outlet to let out this anger that we're feeling. Not everybody will experience the anger phase of grief, while others may have a prolonged period of anger during that time frame, but it begins to subside and kind of go away. And then you're able to think more rationally about what is happening and you're able to feel the emotions. One of the things I allowed myself to do was to feel the emotions. And that's something that I don't think many of us do. I've seen patient after patient who will try and brush over their feelings and not feel them and stuff them down and not really deal with them or push them aside and stay busy and work and do all the things so that they're not feeling what's going on. And in a sense, that can be dangerous, right? Because the way I think of it is a pressure cooker or a crock pot. If you put something under pressure for so long, you don't release that pressure, that pot is going to explode or that thing is going to bubble over. And when it happens, usually it's not a pretty situation. The next is bargaining. And when we're going through the grief process, we may feel vulnerable, we may feel helpless. And in those moments when we're feeling like that, those emotions are intense. It's not uncommon to look for ways to try and regain control or to want to feel like you can affect the outcome of the event. Like if I would have done this, this could have happened. Or if I had done this, then maybe they would still be here. Or if we had done things differently, what if we didn't make that decision? And your brain begins to think of all the ways that you could have done something different, coulda, shoulda, woulda. And we try and bargain with the situation. And in the bargaining stage of grief, you may find yourself creating a lot of what ifs, as I just mentioned, and if only statements, or if I could have, or if I would have. It's not uncommon for religious individuals to try and make a deal or promise with God or whatever these individuals, whatever you believe in return of healing or relief of the grief or pain. Like, Lord, if I do this, you do this, then I'll do that. Or if you do this, then I'll do that. So we're bargaining with ourselves, with whoever it is that we believe in. For me, that's Jesus Christ. And, I found myself bargaining. Like, even though I knew it wasn't going to change anything, I still found myself in that bargaining phase. I feel like I went through every phase of grief. And the one where I got stuck, and I got stuck there for a long time, was depression. So that stage 4 of the grief process is depression. When anger and bargaining begin to resolve, depression feels like the quiet phase of grief. And for me, I got stuck there. So early on in the grief process, you have your emotions going, you're feeling the anger, you're feeling the denial, all of those things, but then you're doing things to try and stay ahead of them. But at some point, you're not able to anymore. And that's when we enter into the depression phase. And so by this point, we're able to embrace, right, that we're working through what's going on with us, and we can tend to get stuck in the depression phase. when all the phone calls stop, when all the people stop stopping by, you're not getting the meals and the visitors like you were in the beginning, this can be a very lonely phase. And it was a phase where I felt like I was stuck and I couldn't figure out my way how to get through it. And I know many individuals who have the same, they're stuck in this depression phase. Depression may feel like an inevitable landing place of any loss. However, we feel stuck and we can't move on and move past this phase in grief is when we need to talk to someone. And again, as I mentioned, this is a normal phase of grieving, but we can get stuck in any of these phases. And the one for me that I felt was most impactful was when I got stuck in the depression phase and I could not find a way to move forward with that. I couldn't find a way to move out of the depression phase. I felt stuck. And so for me, reaching out to help, for help with a therapist or mental health counselor was the catalyst that kind of got me through that depression phase and into the next phase of acceptance. And I find that I feel like I'm in that acceptance phase, which is stage number 5. And it's not necessarily a happy or uplifting stage of grief. It doesn't mean that you've moved past the grief or the loss. It does mean that we've accepted it and that we've come to understand what it means in our life right now, right? So I've accepted that, my grandma's not here any longer and that my life looks a little differently without her here. And I'm okay now with it. Whereas before, when I was stuck in grief, when I was stuck in the depression phase, I was not okay with it. And so as we walk through our grief journey, again, it's going to look different for everyone. And it's important that if you get stuck in any of the phases, that you reach out for help. Now, remember earlier when I talked about that there were now 7 stages of grief. And this is a newer popular model that's been brought to the forefront. And there's 7 stages, which include shock and denial. And this is a state of disbelief and numbing feelings, pain and guilt. You may feel that the loss is unbearable and that you're making other people's lives harder because your feelings and your needs, because of how you're feeling in the moment and what your needs are. And I can definitely say that I felt that pain and guilt because, as I mentioned, I felt stuck and I couldn't function the way that I was before. And I felt extreme guilt around that. Anger and bargaining, you lash out, you tell God or higher power that you'll do anything they ask if you'll only grant the relief of these feelings or situation or bring my loved one back. I would say if I could just go back a couple days and do some things differently, maybe this would not have been the outcome. Depression, we talked about that. This may be a period of isolation or loneliness during which you process and reflect on the loss. I got stuck there, but I was able to move forward to the next phase of acceptance. The upward turn. At this point, the stage of grief is like anger and pain have died down, and you're left in a more calm and relaxed phase or state. Reconstruction and working through. You can begin to put the pieces together in your life. You can put those pieces back together and you can begin to move forward. And then acceptance and hope. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. This is a very gradual acceptance of the new way of life and a feeling of possibility for the future. And so when we think about the different phases of grief, everybody's not going to experience every phase of grief. Some people may skip or bounce back and forth between the 5 or 7, depending on which model you're looking at. And that's okay. It's normal. Grief is normal. Grief is different for everyone. There's no time frame on how long someone will grieve. There's no time frame on when you will, get over it. For me, I question, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I still here? Why do I still feel like this when I was stuck in that depression phase? Um, Everybody will process their grief on their own and in their own timing. And as I mentioned, you can repeat some of the different cycles, right? You can repeat some of the different phases. Not everybody goes from the beginning to the end as I listed them out: denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and the acceptance. Not everyone will go through it exactly the way that they're listed out. Some people may start at the end and work their way backward. It's different for everyone. The key is to know that grief is unique, to know that grief is a normal part of losing someone, to know that there's nothing wrong with giving yourself the space and the time to grieve. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with you as an individual because you feel that your grief process may be taking longer than someone else. Take your time, give yourself grace, and allow yourself to grieve. Um, One of the questions I got as I was doing some research was, what is the hardest phase of grief? And I don't know why there's Starburst that just showed up. That's odd. I don't know why that just happened. I don't know if you guys saw it, but I definitely did. There's no one phase that's harder for, I can't say, because I know for me, depression was the hardest, but I don't know what that will look like for someone else. It just depends on that individual and if they get stuck in one phase of grief. And another question that I received was, how do I go about getting help? And there's many different forms of help, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But I did, some polls, and I asked some questions, and I, sent out some questionnaires to some people to get their opinion and to find out what they wanted to know about this topic. When it comes to complicated grief, grief is a normal process, and it's an expected set of emotions that can occur after a loss of a loved one. However, some people experience more significant and long-lasting levels of grief, and this is known as complicated grief. And complicated grief may share many of the same symptoms of depression. It can also lead to depression or worsening depression in someone who has already experienced it. And so these individuals will have trouble thinking about anything other than their loved one's death. Lasting longing for the deceased loved one, difficulty accepting that this person is gone, long-lasting bitterness over the loss, feeling as if you have no longer have a desire to live or have no meaning, trouble trusting others, difficulty remembering the positive memories of the loved one, and grieving that gets worse instead of better. And if you're someone who has dealt with that or is dealing with that, I feel like everyone should at some point talk to a therapist, get some counseling. It does the body and the brain good, I promise you. But if you find yourself that you're stuck in a phase of grief, or you're not moving on to the next phase, or you're experiencing complicated grief, or if you're already dealing with depression and you've lost a loved one or lost a friend or a colleague or someone, and your grief is compounded because of that, and your depression is getting worse, and you're dealing with extreme anxiety, we want you to get help. How do we take care of ourselves when we're dealing with grief? For me, it was finally get into a place where I can exercise, finally get into a place where I can eat, finally get into a place where I could get out of bed and not be in bed all day. It's going to look different for everyone. But as we've mentioned before, some of the things that we can do whenever we're experiencing any type of mental health issue or any illness, what have you, one is exercising. Exercising releases a feel-good hormone that, you'll feel good for a little bit of time. And then, over time, you'll begin to want to exercise and be more active. Getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Exploring new things. For me, it was tapping into my creative side. This wall behind you came out of me walking through my grief journey and some other projects that I did within the house was a part of, or this whole office was a part of that grief journey and me tapping into that creative side to help me get out of that depression. When do you seek help? One, when you're having difficulty performing everyday activities for a prolonged period of time. You're feeling guilty or you're blaming yourself for the loved one's death. You feel as if you have no purpose for life. You're losing a desire to engage in social activities. You wishing that you would have died as well, or you would have taken that person's place. Feeling as if your life isn't worth living. You're having thoughts of suicide, and depression is just not getting better. The anxiety is not getting better. We want you to seek help. You can talk with your healthcare provider. There's many different options for mental health providers in the area. Get help. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not ashamed to say that I had to get therapy because I needed to be able to work through that depression and work through my grief process. And I'm still in it, right? But I feel like I'm on the other spectrum of it now with acceptance, being able to accept that my loved one is no longer here. When it comes to grief and our bodies, how does grief impact our overall bodies and our overall health? You always know I want to bring it to the physical standpoint of how things are impacted when we are dealing with grief. And I see patients who are dealing with grief and they present with chest pain or shortness of breath. And we do all the workup and there's nothing wrong with their heart. They're dealing with anxiety and grief and loss, and that whole process can have a direct impact on the body. We can see an increase in the heart rate, feel like they're having palpitations or their heart is racing or their baseline heart rate is just increased. And, normally someone would have a very low heart rate and now their heart rate is elevated and it's kind of staying there. That over time can put additional stress on your heart and on your blood vessels and lead to additional complications with the heart. The blood pressure may be elevated. Those individuals, we may see an increase in their respiration rate, or they feel like they can't catch their breath, or they can't take a deep breath. They feel like it's something sitting on their chest. And so we begin to do the evaluation and figure out what's going on. And physiologically, there's really not anything, a cause for it, but we know that anxiety and depression can be effects of grief. There can be increase in inflammation. There was a study I was looking at that showed that when an individual in the study, they had several participants in the study, and they did blood work on them to kind of see what their levels look like. And there's something called the sedimentation rate, which shows the amount of inflammation in an individual's body. And it showed that individuals who were going through grief had a higher level or a substantial spike in their sedimentation rate immediately after and for a prolonged period of time while they were in the grieving process. There's changes in the body's chemical makeup. The chemical balance of the body begins to change. And many times in the psychological aspect, there's changes to those individuals' chemical makeup because of grief, and especially if it's a prolonged process or that complicated type of grief. Fatigue, grief can be exhausting, leading to feelings of extreme tiredness or lack of energy. This can result in from emotional toll, right? That grief, that loss has taken an emotional toll on this person, grieving and disrupted sleep, or both. You're not able to sleep. You can be tired, but you just aren't able to go to sleep. So some individuals deal with insomnia. And when you're not able to sleep, that has a direct impact on the body days after. And changes in appetite. Individuals may experience a lack of appetite. They don't want to eat, while others may overeat as a way to cope with their emotions. Sleep disturbances. Individuals may be dealing with insomnia, frequent waking. They are not getting enough sleep, or they're sleeping too much, or they may be asleep, but they wake up and not feel rested. Headaches and body aches. So stress and tension associated with grief can lead to physical symptoms such as headaches, migraines, muscle aches, and generalized pain. I have had individuals come to me complaining of, I had this migraine for 2 weeks and it just won't go away. And when we look at what's going on with them overall, it's a direct implication of the grief that they're dealing with. Weakening of the immune system. Stress and grief can weaken the immune system, making that individual prone to illnesses and infections. As I mentioned earlier about the heart, grief increases the risk for heart-related illnesses because of the increase in blood pressure, heart palpitations, even heart attacks. Individuals can suffer heart attacks. There's a situation or a medical condition called, I can't think of the name right now. But it's typically when a loved one dies, especially a close partner, someone who's been married or a partner for a long time. When one individual dies, broken heart syndrome is what it's called. These individuals have heart attacks and it's considered to be broken heart syndrome. Their heart literally breaks because of the grief and because of the physiological changes that occur. Digestive issues, individuals can have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, a bunch of things, stomach aches, and we just can't figure out constipation, all because of grief. Changes in weight. Again, if you're not able to eat, you're going to lose weight. And if you're eating too much, you're going to gain weight. And then when your body is dealing with stress, you retain that cortisol, your cortisol levels go up. And so that makes it harder for you to lose weight and you begin to gain weight because of that. If individuals are already dealing with physiological problems or chronic medical conditions, grief can make those things compounded or worse, or it can cause an exacerbation of something. So let's just say a person had lupus and they were in remission, or a person had, some other type of chronic condition and they were fine and they've been doing good, they've been managing their stress, and now all of a sudden that those symptoms have come back to the surface because of the increase in stress. Hormonal imbalances, menstrual cycles may change. I've seen women who did not have a menstrual cycle for the entire time that they were grieving because hormonal imbalances or changes that occurred. Pregnancy tests were all negative. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but it was because of the extreme grief and the hormonal changes that occurred in that individual's body. Decrease in libido, and again, other hormonal related issues, acne, gaining weight, hair loss, you name it. Increase in substance abuse is another. We see individuals primarily alcohol and drugs and some other substances. If an individual is given medication for anxiety, we have to be really careful to monitor them to ensure that they're not taking too many of that medication. But we begin to see an increase in the use of medications to self-treat or to mask their symptoms or to cope with grief, and can have negative impacts. We've seen several overdoses occur during this time, whether it be intentional or not. We just have to be mindful of that. And then again, increased risk for chronic conditions. Chronic stress can lead to increased risk of developing many things within the body. Depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues can come as it relates to this. An individual who may not have had anxiety before, they've dealt with grief, and now they tend to have a long-standing issue with anxiety. And so overall, and I know I'm a little over time, but I wanted to make sure that I shared all of this with you all. Overall, it is so important that we understand that grief is a natural part of life. It's important that we understand that it's okay to feel what you feel. It is okay to take time to get what you need or feel how you want to feel or what you need to feel in that moment. And it is okay to not be okay. To be the strong person that everybody calls upon, the one that everybody goes to for answers, you may find yourself not being able to step away from all of that to grieve and take time to grieve because you're busy taking care of someone else. Take care of yourself. I give you permission to take care of yourself. Grief is normal. We're all going to deal with it at some point in our life. And as I look at social media and I get text messages and I hear from friends and those that are close to me and colleagues who are dealing with so many deaths right now. Just yesterday, we lost someone that was a part of our church community, and it was unexpected and it hit you with a blow, you know? And when I am watching my friends and those that I know for years deal with death of loved ones, it's important that we show up for them, and that even when it's all said and done, when the services have come and gone, that we continue to support them, that we continue to check on them. And while we go on with life as normal, they're still in the midst of it, right? They're still dealing with it. And so while they may seem as though there's nothing wrong, we still want to be able to show up and support them. So for all my family and friends, those that I know, even the ones that I don't know who may be watching this live, I see you and I understand. And it is okay for you to feel what you're feeling. It is okay for you to go through all of the stages or whatever stages that you need to be able to get to a point of acceptance. I can say that I am at the point of acceptance. I had not given any second thought to what tomorrow is until someone asked me about it. How are you doing? Tomorrow's the first. That's the anniversary of your grandma's death. How are you doing? And I just had to sit with it for a moment. And I just had to allow myself to feel those feelings. And they were feelings of sadness. They were feelings of, I don't know, but I allowed myself to feel it. And I allowed myself to cry. The tears did fall. And I was okay. And I am okay. But it's okay to not be okay. If you need help, you can reach out to the National Suicide Hotline. I believe it's 988. You can contact us. Our number is 321-663-2960. If you don't know where to turn and you feel like you need assistance, reach out to someone. There's someone who loves you, and there's someone who wants to make sure that you are okay. You are not in this alone. And even if you feel like you are, you're not in this alone. If I can say anything tonight, it would be to leave you with some closing words. It would be take care of you and do what you need to do for you in order to get through to the next phase. And if you need to sit in one phase for however long it is, you do that, but get the support that you need. I see you. It's okay to not be okay. And I understand. This is Dr. Latoya Wells with Wells Legacy Health and Wellness. As we close out Minority Mental Health Month, doesn't mean that we stop thinking about it. Doesn't mean that we stop advocating for those who need help. It doesn't mean that we just brush this over and keep moving on to the next topic. No. It's something that we're going to keep pushing forward to make sure that those with mental health issues get the help that they need, get the support that they need, the right type of help that they need. Until next time, stay safe and be well. This is Dr. Latoya Wells with Wells Legacy Health and Wellness. Have a good evening.